This is the Aston Martin Heritage Podcast with Garry Taylor.
Thank you for joining us on the Aston Martin Heritage Podcast. It's always a delight that you choose to join us. Now, we have a very special episode here, and I'll come on to the reason why in a moment. Back on episode 33, which was published on the 30th of December 2024, myself and Tim Cottingham had a chat about what happened 50 years ago on that day. It was the day that Aston Martin went into voluntary liquidation, and it seemed like the end of them. Anyway, soon after the publication of that podcast, Richard Dix got in contact with us. He worked at Newport Pagnell at the time, and he shared an interesting story about being totally unaware of the situation and being escorted by the police away from the socialist workers' demonstrations and all the rest of it. So we had a new insight into this, and we thought it'd be interesting to follow it up. So we invited Richard Dix onto the podcast, and he has some personal stories about that incredible day and how it impacted him and the whole team. Now, he does admit he still had a bit of a grudge about Aston Martin soon afterwards, but as usual, Aston Martin had a magnetic pull, and he recalls the joy he had about buying a DB5 for an incredible £350, and later on a Gaydon V8 Vantage. We are absolutely thrilled to have Richard sharing his incredible story because he was there. Here it is.
Growing the passion, sharing the stories. The Aston Martin Heritage Podcast.
Well, as I said in the introduction, following on from the 30th of December 1974 podcast, I'm delighted to be at this most beautiful house of Richard Dix, and it's a lovely sunny day, and we're overlooking the sea. Thank you so much, Richard, for inviting me.
Thank you very much for coming.
It's been a delightful journey coming here. And I'm looking at the boats. I think we should go down to the harbour later. Anyway, part of the reason for these podcasts is we're not just talking about the cars all the time. It's the stories and the people. That's what we want to record. That's what we want to capture. So it was a delight for you to contact us following that podcast because, as I said in the introduction, it was myself and Tim Cottingham reminiscing as we understood it from news reports. We were teenagers at the time, and we covered if company developments were the evil people and all the rest of it. But you were there, so that's what we want to capture. And
yes.
Thanks so much for giving up your time for that. But before we get into we were there, when did you join Aston Martin? How did you get there?
I joined Aston Martin in 1967. I was 21 years old. We were recruiting to staff the newly opened service department, which of course is now Aston Martin Works. It was very new. The building on my first day of work there was virtually empty. It didn't even have any four-poster ramps or lifts to work with.
Oh, right.
It was a matter of building the amount of work up and taking it from there. I started as what they called a chassis fitter, in that you did all the service work, repairs, everything except transmission and engine. From there, should you wish to improve yourself, you could get transferred onto the engine section, which I did. I spent a number of years building engines. I built a lot of engines that were then put in the stores as reconditioned replacement engines for owners. And
so that would be the 6-cylinder, wouldn't it?
They were all 6-cylinder. And I had the opportunity, I was offered the opportunity of becoming not their first, I don't think, but certainly in that generation of Aston Martin, their outside engineer, where cars broke down anywhere. Service weeks were done at dealerships. And I worked directly for Bill Jackson, who was the chief engineer. I think I started that work in 1972. Very experienced. I'd probably built as many 6-cylinder engines as they'd done on the production line.
Oh, good grief. Okay.
The V8s were then coming through. When I had no outside work to do, I was employed then as a test driver, test engineer for the service department, not new cars, but customer-owned cars.
So you say test engineer. What were you doing?
Well, to road test road test the vehicle in,
Yeah.
draw up the worksheets, and then test vehicle out.
Okay. That must have been quite an enjoyable job, I suppose.
You couldn't have had a better job at 23 years of age. They used to have to tell you to go home.
Yeah. Yeah. What were the cars you'd be driving at that age? What was around?
The
DB6?
in the main, it was DB5s, of course, DB6s, not so many DB4s, a few old cars, Lagonda Rapides, as they were being collected even then, because there was only 52 of them.
Yeah.
Some of the old race cars used to come back for the service department. Tom Leake had a Zagato full race car that was looked after by the service department, as was a VEV.
Oh, very famous car.
Which I think then belonged to Nick Cousins.
Yes. And
that, again, was solely looked after by the service department and driven up the road on trade plates.
Right. What would your test route be on these cars?
Well,
the M1 was there, wasn't it?
M1 wasn't really used because there were less busy roads to use in the area. And, of course, it was the early days of the building of Milton Keynes.
Yeah.
And, of course, when they built Milton Keynes, they put the roads and all the services in first. So there were lots and lots of empty, new, wide roads.
That was very useful, wasn't it?
Obviously saved Aston Martin a lot of money.
Saved a lot of money. Fantastic. So that was in the early 70s, wasn't it?
That was to take us through to 1972, yes.
Yes. So we could look at 1974 at the moment. What about the 2 years leading up to it?
The 2 years leading up to it, I was doing more of the outside work, I suppose. There was obviously always a feeling that there were money problems. We had, of course, a lot of problems getting the V8s through the emission testing for export to the US. There was always a hurdle to overcome.
Yeah. But that's always been a story of Aston Martin, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, let's go back to the engines. Did you have any involvement in the V8s in the testing of those cars, testing the engines?
Not on the dyno testing, no.
Yeah,
Only if you rebuilt one in the service department.
Yeah.
And then you were allowed into the dynamometer test room with your newly rebuilt engine to watch it put through its paces and let the exhaust manifolds glow.
Yeah.
And you'd just spent, a week and a half rebuilding this engine, and somebody was sort of trying to break it for you.
That's a bit soul destroying, isn't it? Okay. What was the atmosphere like as a normal working environment? I often keep hearing of the sports club at Newport Pagnell. Was that such a big thing? Social club, sports club?
Social club, there were events. I have to say I didn't attend very many because I lived in Bedford, which was some 20 miles away, and I didn't really sort of get involved socially very much. The work atmosphere was great. The people were always immensely helpful within the service department. There was very much a happy atmosphere, considering the age group and the various differences in age between my generation in my early to mid-20s and most of the workforce being old.
Right.
But once you showed some interest, they showed interest in you.
Right. So was there some degree of pride at working at Aston Martin, or was it just like another job, do you think?
There was both.
Yeah.
Because of the expansion of Milton Keynes and the expansion of the Newport Pagnell area in bringing people to live there outside of bigger cities. There was quite a lot of, well, this is just a well-paid job.
Yeah.
So what? It's got an Aston Martin badge on the front, but they're paying me a lot of money to work here. The more older workforce, there was a pride in it.
Yeah.
A grumpy pride, I would say, with some of them.
That sounds about right. Probably still applies today, I would have thought. You've been there a number of years.
Well, I think things must be very, very different today.
Yeah.
Whether Aston Martin works is different today because, of course, they are doing a lot of restoration work and they have built a series of cars as replicas. I don't know.
Okay. So let's get towards 30th of December 1974. Did you or the workforce... let's be honest, I think Aston Martin have always had a checkered financial history. It just seems to go with the product. So, and as you mentioned earlier, you knew there was money problems, but Aston Martin have always had money problems and, has always just powered through it. Was there any indications getting towards... So in 1974, there was a 3-day week going on. I think there was a threat of petrol rationing. The economic environment wasn't rosy by any stretch.
No.
Was there any feeling that there was trouble ahead?
No. I can quite honestly say, whilst 1974 was possibly a struggle, there was always a lot of work within the service department. There was always work for me. Yes, there were certain people employed there that would be having a little meeting on their workstation just prior to the pay slips being handed out on rumours of there isn't enough in the kitty this week. But it was always taken with a pinch of salt, and it was the same people doing it, and they'd probably done it for years.
Tell me, I've often heard rumours that there was trying to get paid. You got paid weekly, yes? Or
yes,
monthly. It was usually a bit of a struggle for Aston Martin to have money in the bank to pay the staff. Were the staff ever? Can we pay you Monday? Was you always were paid on time? I think it must have been on a bit of a tightrope many a time.
No, never.
That's good.
Our pay was always there. I cannot remember fully when we went from being paid actual cash in a pay packet to, of course, a pay slip and paid directly into your bank.
Yeah.
I guess that was possibly done 72, 73, something like that, and probably was met with great resistance.
Yes.
But no, there was never any indication that we would not get paid.
All right. Okay. But there was always a humorous comment, there's not enough money in the kitty, but well, exactly. Here it came. So,
but a lot of that was just banter from people who had worked there a long time.
Yeah.
And it was very much an armed service sense of humour there.
Right, of course, yes. yes. So when did it start to, when did the cloud seem to come over when you think, hang on, there's actually a sense something's going a bit pear-shaped, do you think? We're up to December. So before Christmas. Okay, so before Christmas, when would you have broken up before Christmas?
Well, I guess we would have worked Christmas Eve because back in 1974, you only got statutory holiday was Christmas Day and Boxing Day.
Yeah.
I honestly thought, having listened to the previous podcast on this, that we actually went back to work in the new year, but that is not the case because looking it all up, of course, this all happened on December the 30th, so we must have gone back to work on December the 30th.
Yeah.
There was absolutely no indication to me or any of the people that I travelled to work with that day. The reason I travelled to work with them that day
That
was
they being the 30th.
The 30th.
Yeah. So up to Christmas, up to the Christmas break, everything's fine. Happy Christmas. See you on the other side.
The only thing I would say was my company vehicle I used to attend customers' cars in this country was a Range Rover. It was something I think that Aston Martin inherited from company developments, and it was painted in Aston Martin colours and was used as the travelling workshop.
The Range Rover was quite a new car at the time, wasn't it?
It was K registered, so it was about 70, 71.
Yeah, H was 70. I always remember H as being 1970.
I seem to remember there was a fuss just before Christmas in that they didn't want me to take the car home over Christmas. It was of little worry to me at all. I left the car there at the back of the service department, and I got a lift with people who also lived in Bedford home. Those same people gave me a ride back on the 30th.
Right.
So I was probably travelling with at least 4 other people. So all 5 of us were completely unaware of what we were walking into.
So this I found fascinating when you telephoned me, because I find it very bizarre. It surely wouldn't happen these days. So you went back on the 30th for a normal day work. What happened?
Well, on trying to turn into the car park, people were being turned away.
Who were turning you away?
I don't honestly remember.
Yeah.
But we were being turned away. The police were there, and quite a few socialist workers, demonstrators.
Right.
Carrying socialist worker banners, union representatives. There was probably more union representatives there than there were police.
Okay.
We weren't allowed to drive into the staff car park. Where the car was parked, I do not know. We then were all corralled and sent directly to Newport Pagnell Cinema.
It must have been quite a shock going to work, and you're confronted with the Socialist Workers' Party, unions, banners, placards. I guess they were shouting. I don't know.
Don't remember that.
No, the police there. You think, what's happened over the Christmas break? What on earth?
Well, I obviously people were informed of that the padlocks were on the door. I remember that being said. The padlocks are on the door. All of you people have got to go to the cinema.
So where was the cinema?
The cinema was...
Because I went with Steve Waddingham, who was doing a Works podcast, and we weren't entirely sure. I'm sure we can go to the archive. So you leave Aston Martin in Newport Pagnell, go over the river bridge.
Over the river bridge. And then not far, another quarter of a mile, and the cinema was on your left-hand side.
I think we saw it.
Just before the junction with the Newport Pagnell High Street.
That's it. I think it's now like a shopping mall for individual shops or something like that.
I doubt if it's a cinema anymore.
No, it's definitely not a cinema, but it had a cinema vibe to it. Okay, so you go to this cinema. Perhaps we try and find some archive pictures of that. So you all get ushered in. What happens?
The situation is explained to us by union reps and I guess union conveners, who were not employed by Aston Martin. They were employed, obviously, by the union. There obviously was a lot of bad feeling. One thing that sticks in my mind was that the union convener who stepped forward to explain things, before he got into his stride, he said, I want the lights to go up, and I want everybody in here that is an employee of Aston Martin to look to their right, left, behind them, and should you see anybody you do not recognise, please let me know, because we do not want anybody in here who is going to go straight to the press or is here for political motives.
Okay, right.
And then we went through
Were there anybody? Was anyone identified?
I think there was. I do seem to remember hands going up and sort of, whether it was sort of some man who had sat behind a sewing machine for 30 years sewing upholstery and nobody ever saw him, or whether it was an activist, I don't know.
Okay. It was going to be big news. I mean, I'm not sure how you can keep the lid on that. Okay, so the lights went up, grassed somebody up.
Yeah.
Next.
And then it was a series of addresses by union conveners, the shop stewards from various departments. Obviously, the production department of the factory took prominence in this because, of course, the unions were much stronger on the production side of the factory rather than the service department. Whilst the service department was 100% union membership, it wasn't taken probably quite as seriously in there. Everybody then was dispersed.
How did they explain the situation? How did they say, when you walked out, how did you understand the situation? What did they say?
How I understood it was the Aston Martin Lagonda had permanently closed. The receivers had been appointed. There would be little or no funds for creditors, mainly staff.
So you weren't going to get paid?
So we were told then that we weren't going to get paid. The advice given, I seem to remember, was get yourself down to the Labour office and sign on.
Bit brutal, wasn't it?
Yes.
That's
not so much when you're 26, 27 by this time. Yes, it came as a bit of a shock. I mean, I got married in 1972, so I'd only been married 2 years.
2 years.
And it wasn't funny. I was probably not probably. I had just lost, a job that could never, ever be replaced in my lifetime.
You say it was brutal, and perhaps for a young man as you were at the time, okay, there's still a future ahead of me. Or about the older staff? They were in their 50s, 60s?
Desolate.
Yeah.
One of the people I travelled with and rode back with, he was a good 10 years older than me. He had worked there longer than me, and his wife had just given birth to twins. And the poor man didn't know where the next pay packet was going to come from.
No, because the economy at the time
was bad.
As I mentioned earlier, 3-day week, recession, world chaos. He couldn't just walk into another job on a Monday morning.
No, it was extremely difficult.
Unlike probably today, was there any support for the staff, or was it just say the labour exchanges down there on the left and that was the end of it?
The labour exchanges down there on the left, yeah.
No.
Because I lived, I think the distance was more than 12 miles away. Of course, I could sign on at my local labour exchange in Bedford.
Yeah.
And I made sure this man who I explained his wife had just had the twin girls. I took him to the labour exchange the next day, went with him. These were broken men. The only lightness in it was when I was interviewed on why I was signing on the unemployment register, I explained that the Aston Martin had closed, and I thought it was more than 450 people. In the paperwork that I've shown you today from Cork Gully, it says 450, so it must have been 450.
Yeah.
And I think I said it was 650, to which the lady I was being interviewed by dropped her pen and said, "Are they all outside?"
Okay, yeah. Yes, I liked a moment.
Yes. I think in your previous podcast, you did state that people were invited back straight away, and a lot of people got their jobs back. None of the people I knew got their jobs back.
Right.
And those that did get a job or applied for a job later on, I don't think they got employment there under the new company until round about September, October time of 75.
75, yeah.
So most of them did have 6 months on unemployment benefit,
Okay.
which wasn't a great deal of money.
No, it wasn't then. It probably isn't that. Now, I think I was aware, I think Mark mentioned in the podcast that I think you were invited back, and I say you, I mean AM, the employees were invited back to go back in to pick up their personal belongings or
Yes.
their own tools.
Yes.
Yeah.
We were not allowed back in until we had the official invite to give you time, day, to go and collect all your personal belongings.
Yeah.
I don't remember being supervised at all by that.
I was going to ask that, yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember that at all. I think we had to go via the security, not the receivers possibly were there, but from memory, it was just the uniformed security that were employed by Aston Martin prior to the closure. We were very quickly sort of ushered in, pick your tools, personal belongings up, gone.
Yeah. Well, what happened to you? So you signed on?
Yes, I signed on. I was relatively lucky in that a great friend of mine, childhood friend, they owned a garage business. And I was told straight away by my friend's father that he would be very pleased to see me turn up and work for him anytime I wanted to, with complete flexibility. And if I wanted to go for interviews and this sort of thing, he would be totally flexible.
Right.
So luckily, did have a source of income outside of the unemployment benefit. There was no work, as you said a little while ago.
Did you keep in contact with some of your colleagues?
I kept in contact with 2 or 3 of my closer friends there, particularly the man who I've explained before had the twin girls.
Yeah.
And I kept in touch with them for a long time. I can't remember where he found work, but he found alternative work, and so did all the other people in the Bedford area.
Okay.
Those that wanted to. Some joined family businesses, some completely dropped out of the industry, and I think one of them became a florist.
Well, there you go. Career progression. Of course, I mean, you weren't going to get paid because there was no money, so I think by definition there was no redundancy either, was there?
No, we got no redundancy money. Eventually we had a letter from Cork Gully to say that we would be paid our holiday dues in lieu of notice.
Yeah.
There was nothing to come back from the pension fund because that was the pension fund that I paid into from 1967 to 1972 was the David Brown pension fund. What the pension fund was between 72 and 74 under the ownership of company developments, I don't know.
Right.
That seems to have slipped under the carpet.
Okay.
Again, from memory, I got in round figures £350.
Yeah.
For 8 or 9 years service. And of course, I got a pension.
Yes.
Because in 2011, the David Brown pension scheme would pay me £60 a year pension when I was 65.
Okay. So, and what are you doing with the money? Your newfound wealth?
We've squandered it.
Squandered it again. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It's amazing that. Well, I'm not saying amazing, but it still existed, and it was they found you, or you kept track of it.
The most amazing thing is, and it's something that must work in this country, that when you're 65, all these little pension funds that you have paid into over the years, suddenly you get letters forwarded on from previous addresses and all this sort of thing, offering you the likes of £60 a year.
Had you forgotten about it? Oh, you thought there's nothing in it.
Yeah, I don't think it was centre of my mind at all in 2011. No. But they give you the option in taking it as a pension or settle for a lump sum. And of course, I think we settled for a lump sum, which was, £100 or something. I can't remember.
Just shows you how small amount was in there, even with all that time with interest rates and all the rest of it. It still only generated that.
No, but at least they did it.
Yes, absolutely.
And the David Brown organisation, of course, was a leading industrial company in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Court Gully a couple of times, and you've very kindly presented me with a letter which is in remarkably good condition, dated 3rd of February 1975. I'm amazed how this letter remains in phenomenal condition for 50 years old. Court Gully were the accountants? Were they the chartered accountants or liquidators? What they're chartered accountants?
They were the receivers.
Yeah, Court Gully chartered accountants in London. You were a creditor. You was owed money because of your wages. So you got this letter.
Yes,
that was distributed to everybody that was owed money.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm quite fascinated because naturally they have to give circumstances leading up to the voluntary liquidation. If I may, I can just read some of the extracts from this. Is that all right?
Yeah.
So it goes on. Mr. Wilson referred to the difficulties experienced in the production of the Aston Martin V8 and subsequently the Aston Martin Lagonda. It was also attributable to the 3-day week, early 1974, which resulted in substantial delays of components. You tend to forget that, don't you? Because Aston Martin needed the parts to make the cars. So on the 3-day weeks, that sort of knackered that. He also stated at the beginning of 1974, the directors decided to increase the company's exports to the USA. Having met all the requirements for cars imported into that country, having satisfied the emission control regulations. However, in about February 74, the company found it necessary to approach the Department of Industry with an application for £500,000 for it to carry on in business. Are you aware of this?
No.
So,
no. All of those things there where these applications for financial assistance from the government was never passed on to the workforce.
No. Okay. Eventually, the Department of Industry indicated in September 74, 13th of September 74, that the application was refused. However, the company cracked on, these are my words, gone ahead with its trying to get a 1975 emissions certification for the USA for the latest model being the Aston Martin Lagonda. Immediately prior to the general election of October 1974, of course, yes, there was one because it was during a very bleak time, wasn't it? The company made another application to the Department of Industry for financial assistance, and the department the offer was made subject to 8 conditions, 7 of which could be satisfied, but the remaining condition that the proposed distributors in the United States, i.e. Royston, will have to agree to take 200 cars per annum, which they were apparently not prepared to do. Mr. Wilson stated there was still considerable demand for the company's products in the USA, Japan, Middle East, Europe and other countries, and that the 1975 program for production of 375 cars was possible on that basis if adequate finance could come its way. And it goes on and on and on. He stressed that the company had maintained an excellent service department, as so far as spares were concerned, they were still available for most models, which had been produced for the last 10 years. And it goes on with political reasons, etc. To conclude, Mr. Cork, who was the accountant, the receiver, and Mr. Chilman seconded the motion. Let's find the motion here. What's the motion? Mr. Cork proposed the motion at the meeting, carried on, and to look towards a fresh approach to relevant authorities to explore the potential for reconstruction of the company or a sale of its assets on a going concern basis. There will be a moratorium of all creditors, unsecured and preferential, for 6 months. Da-di-da-di-da. And it'll go through the courts. The resolution was approved. And this is dated the 3rd of February 1975. And lots of names here and lots of numbers here. And at first glance, the deficiency in assets, in other words, what Aston Martin owed and what they had in realisable assets, what they could sell it for, was just over £500,000, which was what they were asking for, which doesn't sound anything, does it?
No, not at all.
What was it like when you received that letter?
I honestly think that it was confirmation that it would never reopen to me.
You think, okay, Aston Martin have had a checkered history. It's always, carried on, but this seemed had a finality to it, did it?
Yes, I think so. I thought that we were badly treated as a workforce.
In what way?
In
Communication?
that communication, in that it had been bought for the land value within Milton Keynes, and I honestly thought it was time to move on. I went to that other high-performance car manufacturer who supplied, estate cars to auctioneers and things like this. I went to Volvo.
There we go. I was thinking high performance. Well, are you going to match? Okay, Bentley, Jaguar. Okay, Volvo.
No, I did apply for a position much the same as the one I had at Jaguar. I went for 2 interviews in the early part of 1975, and then I had a letter from Michael Edwards, who was then the managing director, apologising that he would have to withdraw the offer of the job because of the pending problems he could see within British Leyland.
Yes, yeah.
The reason I went to Volvo was my wife worked as the public relations officer for London Brick Company. They owned an enormous amount of Volvo trucks to deliver their bricks with. Trying to help me through her, a transport manager got me an interview with Volvo trucks.
Mm.
I went for the interview at the Royal Scot Hotel in King's Cross, was immediately offered a job within Volvo Penta. Trucks were not mentioned, cars were not mentioned. It was, what did I know about the marine industry? Very little. The Swedish people were pretty impressed with this because they didn't want dyed-in-the-wool marine people.
Oh, really?
They wanted somebody with a bit of free thinking.
Mm.
And myself and a couple of other people were then charged with setting up the Volvo Penta marine dealer network within the UK in order for them to bring the marine products fully into this country.
Aston Martin, spoiler alert, did survive. And I think, well, actually, we are recording this in June, and I think it's nearly 50 years to the month of June or July. I think the consortium came in with a package to save Aston Martin.
I think so.
I think it was that. So very, very, very timely. Were you tempted to go back? Were you offered to go back? Didn't want to go back?
No. I live and breathe high-performance cars, or have done through my motoring life. It left a very large chip on my shoulder, and I vowed I'd never buy one if I had the money, and I certainly would never go back and work there.
Right. However,
I had to eat my words, of course, because much later on, getting myself established within the marine industry in this country, we set up our own supply company, supplying boat builders with all sorts of goods, and we manufactured desalination plant, big voltage converters, all this sort of thing. And having had a few other manufacturers' sports cars, eventually I was convinced to buy a V8 Vantage because I was told by friends of mine that it was the car that they should have produced when I worked there.
right.
And it was.
Yeah. What year would that have been? What year Vantage?
My first Vantage was 2007, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Do you like it?
It was a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
It was everything that was promised me.
Yes.
I liked it so much I went and bought another one.
So this chip on your shoulder soon went, didn't it?
Yeah. It must have been ice. It melted.
Yeah. Aston Martin does that.
And then the last one I had, I bought just before COVID. At the end of 2019, I bought an N430.
N430. Okay.
which of course is a variation of the V8 Vantage.
Yes.
A little more horsepower,
Very
fancy colours.
but very desirable, though, aren't they?
Very
The N1s,
desirable, beautiful car. By which time we were certainly looking at major changes in our lives, in selling the farm, moving on from all the things we did. And I really thought that if we did this move to Torquay, I wouldn't need 460 horsepower.
Well, you say that. Early in the morning, 5 a.m, sun coming up, no one around. You can never have too much horsepower.
Well,
But I know what you mean. I drove here, and some of the roads are narrow.
And of course, at that time, because of my history with Aston Martin, I was doing quite a few things to help the Aston Martin Owners Club in this area.
What area is that? I can't remember.
Devon and Cornwall, Area 20.
Area 20, that's it.
And in the Owners Club magazine, it was telling me that if I'd got an N430, all these people selling Aston Martins would buy it off me and give me my money back and all this sort of thing. And we'd got to the stage where the car wasn't being used adequately. There was the pending move, and I sold it to Aston Martin Bristol for the same money that I paid for it 3 years previously.
That's a result. You must be chuffed with that. So
Yes.
You just pay for the running costs.
Exactly.
Lovely. That's interesting. How long were you a member of the Owners Club?
I must have joined them about 2012, something like that.
So when you got the Aston?
Yes.
Okay, because I was wondering, because, you left Aston Martin, treated you badly, I've got a chip on my shoulder, they can go, whatever. But I was just wondering, did you keep half an eye on the company and the people? And that's probably quite a long time, 20-odd years, isn't it? 30 years.
I suppose out of the corner of your eye, you were always keeping an eye on it because you had spent, a number of very pleasurable years being employed by them.
Yeah.
And it was great fun at the time, and it was a very unusual job to have.
Yeah.
None of my friends, colleagues had a job like that ever, particularly at 23 years of age.
Yeah.
So yes, I suppose it was in the corner of my eye, but of course, until they had the V8 Vantage, they really, really only had the great big Vantage.
The Newport Pagnell.
Yeah.
I suppose they had the DB7 before that. That might have. Yeah, but the Vantage came in. That's below DB7, didn't it? Yeah, because the
DB7 was a very pretty car, but of course it was a XJS in Aston Martin clothing.
Discuss. Okay, well, I think we've got another podcast there because we had a brief interview with Ian Callum, and he'll go, "That is not an XJS underneath that." So we'll get you and Ian Callum together, and we'll see how that goes. There's one car that you haven't mentioned because we had a chat before the podcast, as we always do. But before we get on to that, here we are, 2025. What do you think of the current range? Are you aware of the current range?
I think the current range is astounding. I do hope they continue to sell like they appear to be.
Yeah.
I think the product development has been absolutely amazing considering the low volumes of production.
It is, isn't it?
But of course it is reflected in the price, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to swap my house for one now.
Yeah, they are reassuringly expensive. Yes. So let's go back to a car that you hadn't mentioned. Was a DB5?
A DB5?
Yes, you bought a DB5.
Yeah, I bought a DB5 in 1972.
Okay, that's good. So,
not many people have got married and bought a DB5 in the same year when they, were going to be made redundant at the end of the year.
And what did your wife think of it at the time? What have I married into?
No, it was all taken in our stride, and it was, of course, a project to earn some money out of.
Yeah.
We had just got married. I had pestered Aston Martin service department, the service manager at the time, to try and buy this abandoned DB5 that stood out the back of the service department.
Was it like a test mule or something? Was it a test car? Or
No, it was a car that was taken there for repair by an owner. It had a hole in the crankcase with a connecting rod sticking out, which is very, very unusual for a six-cylinder engine.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it's probably the only one I've seen throw a conrod.
Wow.
They would never sell it to me. There was always an excuse on why they couldn't. It didn't belong to them. And I think after 6 years, whoever it's been abandoned with can claim ownership. And I was approached and told that if I gave them £350 and took it away on Friday, it was mine.
That was 1972.
1972.
£350 in 1972 still seems a bit of a bargain to me.
Yes, but remember the engine was no good.
yes, of course, yes. So, okay, yeah, it was seeing daylight.
Yes. Luckily, I had facilities to be able to lift the engine out. Parts were bought. I reconditioned the block crank assembly. I can't remember where the new piston and conrod came from. I don't think I bought it. I think my friend's father's company, they probably bought the spares for me through their their stores department. It could have come from Aston Martin, Newport Pagnell, of course, because this is prior to the closure. The car is very quickly up and running. Having recently carried out a service week for the then dealer in Coventry, I approached the people who owned that dealership on would they like to buy a little bit shabby DB5. It was actually in very sound condition. The paint was very good.
What colour was it?
It was Dubonnet Rosso.
Oh, lovely.
With a tan interior. And it ran beautifully. It was in reasonable condition. The only sad thing was that in its rest period at the back of the factory, somebody stole the rear overriders.
Okay.
And I discovered, of course, why they stole the DB5 rear overriders, because when I came to try and replace them, they were unobtainable. But the people who bought it from me didn't seem to be very, very bothered on whether it had got rear overriders or not, and they gladly paid me, and this is from memory, we didn't quite get £1,300 for it. I think we got £1,296, and off it went to Coventry under its own steam on trade plates, never to be heard of by me again.
Okay.
And I wish I'd have noted down the registration number.
Oh, good grief. I was going to ask you, does it still exist?
And I have got black and white photographs of it, but every photograph, there's no sign of the registration plate. But £1,296, which amounted to, in round figures, £800 profit, was a considerable amount of money to us.
Yeah.
In
having said that, you had to rebuild the engine and bits, wasn't there? There was
much of that was fairly negligible, I think.
And the labour was free, wasn't it?
The labour was free.
Yeah. Did you find out why to throw a rod? Because those engines are pretty bomb-proof.
No, it was very odd. The connecting rod had broken right up near the small end. It had broken right up near the gudgeon pin. Smashed the piston and, of course, exited the block, taking some of the cylinder liner with it.
Okay.
And I'd never seen one. In all the engines I did, when working there, I never ever saw a six-cylinder engine with a hole in the block. I saw one V8. Similar sort of thing.
I tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to get Tim Cottingham. I know Tim listens to this. Tim, you're on a mission to find this DB5. You got the records, so we can find out when it was sold. It was, we'll get onto that and see if we can still find it. It'd be wonderful if it still exists. I'm sure it would do. When did you sell it? What year did you sell?
It would have been sold the same year as bought it. 72.
72. Right. There you go, Tim. Over to you. So, Richard, it's been an absolute delight to hear your story. I mean, the circumstances at the time were, pretty dire, but, it's 50 years ago. And as I said at the beginning, it is about the stories. It is about the people. So this is just pure magic for us, for the Aston Martin Heritage Podcast, to hear your story about yourself and the people and how they were affected by this event just over 50 years ago now, on the 30th of December 1974. Richard, thank you very much. It's been a delight.
You're very welcome. I've been very pleased to do this because these things mustn't be forgotten, and we're all getting old now.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard, for sharing your story. It was just great to hear from you and hear your stories, and thank you so much for your time. If you have any stories yourself about working at Aston Martin or the cars, etc., please do get in contact, as Richard did. Just drop us an email at podcast@amht.org.uk and we'll have a conversation and see what we can do. It'll be great to hear from you. Until next time, see you then.
You're listening to the Aston Martin Heritage Podcast. Discover more about the story of Aston Martin, the cars, the people, the history with the Aston Martin Heritage Trust. You're always welcome to visit us at our museum in Oxfordshire, so find out more via amht.org.uk.